always reverted back to the basic question: what does the patient want? Our approach to this was what's the right thing to do, and the definition for that is what's best for the patient, or what does the patient want. Turns out to be fairly simple. Patients want to know what happened. Okay? Well, it's amazing how often nobody tells them. So the first is tell them what happened. Tell them you're sorry it happened. Tell them you're going to try to find out why it happened. And then when you do your investigation, come back and give them a follow-up. And if indeed the system has broken down and the individuals have made mistakes, admit it and apologize for it. And make restitution for the financial impact of it if indeed it was our fault and we caused it. It really isn't much more complicated than all that. What we said is treat people the way you'd want to be treated yourself, the golden rule. So it's not hard to remember, but it's amazing how seldom all of those things happen. And that is, of course, exactly why we did the document, was to try to move the process along so that the norm is that all those things happen. I think there are really two major barriers. One is the acute discomfort physicians have in doing this, and that's part of what we need to overcome with training and exposure and discussion. The second is their continuing fear of malpractice, of being sued. For 100 years, doctors have been told by the risk management people and the lawyers, don't admit that anything happened, don't admit that you did anything wrong, and don't apologize. If you do all that, you're much more likely to be sued and to be used against you in court. And that's all just plain wrong. That's a myth. It's an absolute myth. It's exactly the other way around. That is one of the main reasons people sue. Malpractice lawyers tell me that 2/3 of their patients sue in order to find out what happened. And I've had outstanding lawyers look me in the face and say, if the doctors would tell them what happened and say they were sorry, most of these patients would not file suits. So there's no evidence whatsoever that being honest with your patients makes them more likely to be sued. The evidence is all the other way around. We now have hard evidence, meaning facts, to back that up. In first the VA, which started 10 years ago, and then more recently, University of Michigan, experience in Colorado with their malpractice carrier, now in Chicago and California and some other places, that when you are honest and inform patients and apologize and make some effort at restitution, that the actual number of suits drops dramatically and the total amount of payouts drops dramatically. That is, you pay much smaller amounts to compensate people for the injury, kind of payments most of us think is totally appropriate. I don't think patients should have to sue us in order to have us pay for an injury that we caused. But anyway, the facts are that when you do this, the payments drop dramatically and the number of suits drops dramatically. So I think we've proven that it was a myth, but it's a hard job getting physicians to believe that. I think it's very fundamental or intrinsic in our makeup. That is, physicians, people who are chosen to come to medical school, are high achievers. They're people who are used to being A students and doing well, and they have a fair amount of ego strength and a fairly high self-image, and those of us who are surgeons probably have even higher than average. And so physicians are intelligent and hardworking and conscientious, and certainly every doctor I've ever known really tries to do the right thing, tries to do a good job, tries to do a perfect job. And when we fail, it's very difficult. It's challenging to your self-image. That's true for everybody, but I think for doctors it's probably worse because they are so invested in producing a perfect product, and they feel they failed their patient and they failed themselves. And so a major failure in which you make a mistake and a patient's harmed is a blow to your ego, to your self-image, to your belief in who you are. In I think, a more profound way than we've been sensitive and aware of. And so it can be very difficult. And that's why we see, I think, there's a lot of evidence. This is not just my opinion, but it's why we see a lot of defensive behavior, where we see denial, in which the physician sometimes will go to quite extreme levels to prove to themselves that it wasn't their fault. And so they blame the nurse, they blame the system, they blame the patient, sometimes overtly, sometimes rather subtly, but it's not unusual to see some kind of defensive behavior there, defensive in terms of protecting your own self-image. But when that doesn't work, or if they don't do that, then it can be very depressing for them and very threatening. And it makes it difficult for them to do their primary job, which is to attend to the patient's needs. So at the time when the patient needs us to be the most understanding and the most open and listening and supportive is right when we are psychologically the least able to do it, because we're consumed with our own self-doubt and self-worry.